Hi, everyone, and welcome to our usual Sunday talk within the Nine-Sided Circle. I'm one of your two hosts, Nora Kyle.
And I'm the other one of your two hosts, Mushtaq Ali.
So, thank you so much for joining us. We have many of the usual suspects, plus a new person hanging out with us today. And if you would like to be one of those new people hanging out with us, excuse me, you can look in the description below and check out either our Facebook group or Facebook forum, or you can join our email list. Either of those ways will get you a link to these talks. We often get questions about that, and that's how you can join us if you're curious. Other than that, we do have our usual YouTube spiel.
Though, one of our commenters chided us about the length of our YouTube spiel in this last week. So what we're going to do is we're going to do the YouTube spiel, and it'll contain the same information, but we will do it in such a way that it seems so much shorter that they just go right by.
How might we do that?
By saying, hey, welcome. If this is your first time here, we're happy to have you. We would be absolutely delighted if you would subscribe to our channel, and please hit the like button, unless you hate us, in which case you can hit the hate button. We don't mind. And consider leaving a comment. We would love to hear from you, especially if you have any good ideas like shorten up the damned introduction. So, there you have it, our spiel.
I knew that was coming someday.
Yeah.
That day has come. So
that day has come.
Thank you for that. And we take that feedback to heart. We'll do what we can with it. Do we have any announcements that we need to offer?
We're going to be in Sweden in May.
Yeah. Okay. So I think we're ready to say that officially.
Yeah, we've already said that officially.
Be having our first ever in-person retreat in Sweden in May of 2023. And we posted a little bit of information about that in our forum. But there will be more info upcoming over the next couple weeks.
And we'll even do a video on it with pictures of where we're going to be staying, because it is outstanding. Sweden is beautiful as it is, and it is particularly beautiful in May.
Yeah.
And so we have found this wonderful little place, kind of slightly off the beaten track, but just a few minutes from the railroad station. So we are going to be doing a week-long retreat. It is going to be seriously working with the kinds of things that we have been talking about here for the last 3 years. And hopefully a few people will come and we'll have a good time. It will be physical. Be prepared to break a sweat. It will be intellectual. We will philosophize. It will be spiritual. We will call down the angels upon our heads, or something like that. It'll be a lot of fun. And if you're really lucky, I will cook for you.
Yes. So we have lots planned to discuss about that. We don't want to give it all away right now. And we want to make sure that we leap into tonight's content, of course.
Yeah, because the guy who chided us is probably sitting there going, damn it, you're going too long again.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so yes, our topic of discussion this evening is Gurdjieff and the Masters of Wisdom.
Dun, 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 dun.
Yeah. So we have discussed some history before, but we are heading in a slightly different direction this evening in terms of history and its relationship to Gurdjieff and such, as well as the work that we do. So let's get started. Where do we begin?
We begin. Once upon a time, a long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, there was a bunch of crazy Persians who decided that they had to move from Khorasan all the way up into Bukhara, which is in Central Asia. And the guy who led them there was named Yusuf Hamidani. And he is interesting because he was basically the starting point of a line of transmission, a line of teaching that has gone for over 1,000 years now, because this was around, this was in the 1000s when this happened. Now the thing is, what he brought, and he was probably not the originator of this, he was the receiver of it from someplace else, but he brought an entirely different take on Sufism from what had been the standard up until that time, and what is mostly the standard even today. He was a profound teacher, and he is the starting point for several Sufi tariqas that have all branched out from him, at least two of which Gurdjieff spent a lot of time with. This is not something that we're saying, this is something that he's saying, and I was actually just rereading this today in his semi-autobiographical fantasy novel, Meetings with Remarkable Men. He talks frequently about hanging out with the dervishes from Bukhara and doing work with them. Feel free to go back and check yourself. Check up on this yourself. And he specifically mentions one Sufi by the name of Dervish Bogga-Eddin, which is a Slavic sort of pronunciation of the name Bogga-Eddin, which is the guy who founded one of the main lines of transmission from Yusuf Hamidani, a guy by the name of Bogga-Eddin Naqshband, who was the source of the Naqshbandi order, which is probably the single largest Sufi order in the world right now. Maybe it's changed a little bit, who can say? So, Gurdjieff ran into these cats and spent a fair amount of time with them. If you read his book, and it was Bogga-Eddin that finally pointed him at the Sarmoun Brotherhood, which is the great mythical brotherhood where he went and studied for some amount of time. And learned all of his cool stuff. Following me so far? Yes, good. So, what can we know about this? We know that he states in Meetings with Remarkable Men that he had gone to these people, and this is something I put in the blurb on the write-up for this, where I said, and I'm going to read it to you all. I was living in this new town, and it means New Samarkand, as opposed to Old Samarkand, when I first met Soloviev. I had gone there chiefly to visit places where I could gain a more thorough knowledge of the fundamental principles of the religion of Mohammed, and to be able to meet Bukharian dervish acquaintances of various sects, among whom was my great and old friend Bogga-Eddin. This is from Meetings with Remarkable Men. And this tells you what you need to know. Yes, Gurdjieff was studying Islam and Sufism. He was hanging out with particular dervish sects. Not just one, he mentions various. And that's important. And we can surmise as to what two of them, and probably the main two, were. And one of them was one of the lines of the Naqshbandi. They were the Sufi order of Bukhara for a very long time. And even today, in Kazakhstan, when they got their freedom from Russia, of course, the Wahhabis started moving in, the Saudis started throwing in money so that they could build Wahhabi mosques there and turn everybody as conservative as possible. And the way the Kazakh government dealt with it is that they gave money to the Naqshbandis and said, you represent Islam to us, so you counter this. And they did. And the Wahhabis have not gotten any kind of serious foothold in that area. So that's how deeply the Naqshbandi Tariqa was embedded in that area. So the other Bukharian Tariqa that he would have been palling around with would be the Yasevi, who are usually a bit further east from Bukhara, but often in that same area. They were not uncommon, especially back then. Both of these groups are in direct lineage back to Yusuf Hamedani, the guy who I started out talking about. And here's the thing. These orders branched out over the centuries. You got 1,000 years just about of change going on. Some of them kept the original teachings, some of them didn't. And so it's important to understand this when you're looking at, you go, oh, Gurdjieff was affected by the Naqshbandis, and then you go and look at some of the more public Naqshbandi orders and you go, there's nothing there that's anything like Gurdjieff. And that's a reasonable observation, because there ain't. It's not every branch of the Naqshbandi. It's not every branch of the Yasevi. But there are the core branches, the tap roots, as it were, that contain this line of instruction from which Gurdjieff created the core of his teachings. And I know everybody in the Gurdjieff world is going to freak out because they don't want to admit the Sufi influences. They like to think, oh, it's esoteric Christianity and all of that. That's bullshit. You can, if you look at the practices, there's like a one-to-one corollary between the core practices of Gurdjieff and the core practices of these tariqas.
Or, it's often been argued that Gurdjieff didn't have any religious, inspirations at all, that it's completely separate from that. And we have to realize that there are not sure exactly what I'm trying to say, except that I think people want to paint these religious origins or these spiritual, orders and such with a brush that says they're conservative, they're boring, they have nothing to offer, they're from like the Dark Ages. And as we can see, and as people who have benefited from these practices know, they continue to be vividly enriching.
Yeah. And when it comes to this particular group, they were notorious for hanging out with anybody who was cool.
Yeah. So
they didn't care if you were a Zoroastrian or a Buddhist or a Christian. They'd hang out with you if you had something that you knew that they didn't. And this was well documented for especially the early masters. And Khoja, which is the word that Khwajagan comes from, basically means a master. So the Khojagan are the masters, in this case, the masters of wisdom. The thing to understand is that in this line, and this is something that Gurdjieff took away, though the people who were participants in it were devout Muslims, all the records say they kept the Sharia, they're praying 5 times a day, they're fasting during Ramadan, they're going off to Mecca, they're doing all of the Muslim things that one does. They didn't insist that that was the way to find reality. They viewed it more as a practice. This is my words, not theirs, because if they said that back then, they would have been burned at the stake or nailed to the cross or whatever one did for heretics. So, what makes this group unique, and what did Gurdjieff take from them to craft his own methodology? I should say that while Gurdjieff spent time amongst these folks, there is no evidence that he was initiated into their tariqas. He was what they call like a salik, a seeker, but not an initiate.
Yeah, why do you think that was?
Because I don't think he could commit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And so what you have, and this is probably going to piss a bunch of people off too, Gurdjieff was not the emissary of the Sarmoun Brotherhood. He just wasn't. First of all, there's no real Sarmoun Brotherhood, but what the Sarmoun Brotherhood was modeled on, he's not their emissary. He couldn't be, because he would have to be their initiate.
Yeah, and he was busy pursuing his own
His
project.
own stuff, yeah.
Yeah.
He was almost like somebody from the 2000s. He wanted a bit of this and a bit of that and cobbled together his own understanding. He happened to be really good at it, which is, I think, why the dervishes were happy to teach him, in so much as he could learn. But Ouspensky was prophetic when he said that this was the fragments of an unknown teaching. It's not the whole thing, it's parts of it.
And it's very eclectic, as we see. So it's fragments, an eclectic collection of fragments from various traditions and philosophies and methodologies, melded into his own methodology.
Yeah. And that's not to say that his methodology was bad. I personally really love his stuff, even the really crazy shit.
And of course, he's also working from his own experience and his own sense of meaning as it emerges from these things. And there, as you say, that's something that many of us end up doing today.
Yeah. Coming from a martial arts background, I mean, every third week of the month, some new dude would show up having studied 47 different martial systems and created his own, which are better than all of theirs. And Gurdjieff was a little bit like that, except that he was exceptional in the sense of he actually learned some things. And so, respect to him for that. He brought some very cool stuff into the Western world where this teaching was unknown. And it's funny because Gurdjieff's teaching was unknown in the West. It was unknown in Russia. It was unknown in France and England and America. But in Bukhara or Samarkand or even in Anatolia, there was nothing new about this. There was nothing surprising. This knowledge had been there for centuries. And there have been people working with it for centuries. The Naqshbandi, certain lines of the Naqshbandi work with this information today. Certain lines of the Yesevi work with this information today. Certain lines of the Bektashi, the Bektashi are in the line of Ahmed Yesevi. They're working with the material today. The Kubrawi are another one. And it's not all of them. It's certain lines within a certain group. So there are probably 24 variations of the Naqshbandi in the world today. Some of them are just religious conservatives in funny hats. Others of them are really serious about what they do. And there's ways that you can tell the difference, and we don't even need to go into that right now. But what are the differences? Noor, that's your cue.
What are the differences?
So you have the general Sufis in the world who, they're all about the love and the bliss, right?
Yeah,
God,
and the dancing,
the
and the music,
dancing,
and the cool headgear, and so and such.
And the fana.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll touch on that too, because that's one of the things that Gurdjieff brought an understanding of back with him that is unusual. But please carry on.
Well, I mean, we are going to be, I think even in our work, we're always uncovering what lies beneath that, beyond the trappings of the outer stuff, which is it's almost like pageantry, right? And it's very exciting, especially for newcomers who want to get involved with Sufism. They like the aesthetic of it. But at some point, if you're serious about what it means to be a Sufi or to do the work of engaging with these methodologies, it means if you aren't already, you become disinterested in those trappings. You get ready to sit down and do the work of engaging with your own humanity, essentially. That's where it begins. And we often frame that as working on the ego, or sometimes in religious terms, building a connection with God. But as we see from the work of Gurdjieff, what we're talking about is slewing away all of the, I'm going to use our favorite word, the detritus that we pick up over a lifetime of, it's out a little, detritus. The detritus that we pick up when we engage with the world in a way that is not as conscious as it could be. What do you think?
I think that's correct. Now, when before the Khwajagan broke off into different branches, it was the rule of the order that you lived a plain life, that you did not dress in some sort of uniform. You looked like everybody else. You did not ever put yourself forward. The rule says, always participate in the prayer, but never be the imam. Don't call the prayer. Go to prayer, but don't be the one who calls it. Be obscure. Be plain. There are no uniforms. There are no particular Sufi hats that you get to wear that shows that you're a member of this order or that order. There are no orange robes. There's nothing. Like I say, the robes of our tariqa are a t-shirt and blue jeans. Black t-shirt, but a t-shirt.
Yeah.
Or if you're newer, it's a t-shirt and tights.
Leggings. Yeah.
Yes.
Yep. I'm not ready to let my leggings die. All right. So, yeah, as you can see, that really goes against the grain of this idea of the exotic, the ostentatious. Look at how special I am. I've committed my life to this project of, you know, grating away at my ego for the next 70 years or however long you might have
Yeah.
left, God willing.
Yeah. And you work in the world. And this is
Yeah.
something that Gurdjieff brought back with him, the idea of the fourth way, of being in the world while doing your work, working on all levels of yourself while holding down a job. And that
Yeah.
was a tenet of the Khwajagan from the beginning is you don't go out begging for alms for yourself. You don't accept personal gifts. You work by your own hand. You support yourself by your own hand. Though they would accept gifts to uphold the school, as long as it wasn't for them in particular. And we try and keep that to this very day. Any donations we get goes to doing this kind of stuff. We don't benefit from it financially. We have day jobs.
Yeah. And you also mentioned being in the world. That doesn't mean
Yes.
retreat does not happen, but your commitments and fulfilling them, those come first.
Yes. So yeah, retreat is good. Fasting is good. Fasting is one of the tenets of the work. All of this is really important. And being in the world is equally important. And we see that, again, going back to meetings with remarkable men, Gurdjieff had no problem working when he was out learning this stuff. I mean, he would do some shady jobs like pawning off American canaries on people,
Oh,
but it was
man.
still work. It was sly work. I mean, he would do things like he would make paper flowers and sell them, make them by hand. That's how he got into the canary business, because he realized it was easier to paint sparrows than it was to paint paper flowers. So, what else is different from the standard?
There's less of a focus on it's not that ecstasy is completely absent or condemned, but there's less of a focus on catharsis and getting lost in the colors and the shapes and the frankly fantasy of engagement with the greater than self. It's much more grounded. There's a sense that being in the world is part of your connection to the divine. It is one and the same as. So we can say there's a bit of a what they might call a sober quality to it, as opposed to strictly ecstatic, which gets into the reliance on dancing and music and the colors and the lights and the shininess and all of that stuff. You can stay in the moment, you can stay present with what is in front of you without getting lost in that stuff and be doing the work.
And so, what is the work?
That's a big question when we're talking about Gurdjieff's methodologies, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's actually pretty simple because he talked a lot of philosophy, but only minimum technique. He spent most of his time giving people a framework for his work rather than teaching them the work, at least in his lectures and writings and what we have today. His actual work consisted of the sacred dances, self-remembering, self-observation, drinking a whole hell of a lot at dinner.
So, as you can see, you're not getting lost in the fantasy stuff, but you're also not austere about it. So, when we say sober, you're right. Like, there's this kind of, again, engagement with the world, engagement with the pleasures of life, really, which for some may be drinking.
Yeah, he was notorious for doing these evenings of toasts and getting all of his students, 3 sheets in the wind.
It's almost like there's a season for everything, isn't it?
Yeah,
As opposed to we never do this or we never do that.
yeah. Well, we never do that because we're cheapskates, so we don't want to buy expensive booze and pour it down you guys.
You could buy us booze, though. I'd be okay with that.
So, in standard Sufism, there is a term called fana. Fana means erasure, annihilation. And they talk about the stages of annihilation, which for most tariqas go like this. Fana fi sheikh, annihilation in your teacher. Fana fi pir, annihilation in the head of your order. Fana fi rasul, annihilation in the Prophet Mohammed. And then finally, fana fillah, which means annihilation in God. You'll find this is very common. The Khwajagan and those of us who follow them reject this for a number of reasons. Fana fi sheikh means you have to lose yourself in another human being and literally let them take you over, to be effaced in them. So you have no will, you are acting only on their will, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and the way that's rationalized is that your teacher knows better than you. Your sheikh, by the way, is teacher, so this is getting lost in the teacher. You idolize them, you imagine on purpose that they have all these wonderful qualities that you would like to drink in and embody in yourself. So you hone in on them as that representational figure of those qualities. They may or may not have them. One hopes that they might. One hopes that they might have put in the work to be a person who behaves well and treats their students well.
And the Khwajagan utterly rejected this for the reason that they had no interest in anybody worshiping them.
Mm-hmm.
And they pointed out that the Prophet denied that he was the way for anybody to find God. He was just another cat on the road who happened to be way far away ahead of everybody else, but he was still just a human being. He was not the way to God. God is the way to God. And to efface yourself in the prophet is to miss the point. To efface yourself in your teacher is to miss the point. And it opens up the possibility of abuse so wide that it ain't even funny.
Yeah, spiritual abuse is such a hot topic now, right?
And it doesn't mean necessarily that what happens is that the teacher starts believing their own press and that they're infallible, that they have to always be right. And so there's a technical term for what happens, which is stupid shit comes out of their mouth. And everybody goes, oh, wow. Here's an example. One sheikh, very big turban, he forbade all of his students who were pregnant from having ultrasounds. Because he said, the ultrasound will change the DNA of your baby. This is utter bullshit. It is a complete fabrication. And it is so incredibly dangerous because an ultrasound is a non-invasive way of making sure a baby is healthy. And yet there are all of these women in this very big tariqah who won't get ultrasounds because this guy who has zero background in medicine and zero background in physiology and zero background in ultrasound machines decided that this was the case. And it still to this day, to me, is shockingly stupid. Sorry, you can tell I have a soapbox on this. You know, I come from a medical background. You know, the stupid shit that gets people killed ticks me off. And that's the problem with taking anybody as, oh, I'm going to lose myself in this person, because there are no perfect humans. I mean, people say, yeah, the prophet was perfect. God protected him from making mistakes. But I've read my Quran. And Allah occasionally got pissed at the prophet. And pretty much said so. I mean, it was gentle in comparison to burning Sodom and Gomorrah, but he was still pissed. And that suggests that, thank God, the prophet was just human. And even when you get to the stage of, you get to the stage of fana fi pir.
Yeah, so you go from the sheikh
to the head of the
pir.
order. So if you're a Mevlevi, you might do, your teacher within the Mevlevi order, your sheikh, and then Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi, you're like losing yourself in him. The trouble with losing yourself in dead people is that they're dead. They aren't here. And most of the time, you're just projecting your own stuff out there in the universe. You're not in any kind of connection with them. I realize that this is also somewhat blasphemous.
I mean, I've been thinking, like, this is very much, even today, in mainstream Islamic culture, you are supposed to seek out perfected people and then try to basically become like them, imitate them in every way possible. And so this is a challenge to that for sure.
Yeah. And, the prophet is somebody whose life is worth emulating. No doubt about that. But you have to use your own discernment. It doesn't matter which shoe you put on first. It does matter how you treat your wife, for you guys out there. And, somebody came to the prophet once and said, oh, messenger of God, what shoe should I put on first in the morning? And he went, I don't know, put on the right one first. And now we're stuck with that.
Yeah. So, I mean, the prophet treated his partners well, and
particularly his first and most important wife, Khadija, the first Muslim, the first believer, he treated her as a full partner. We could learn from that. But we are digressing here. So, what the Khwajagan and Gurdjieff has is a whole different form of fana. The first level is called, I know it in Farsi, so it's going to come out in Farsi. Fana-i akam. This is Gurdjieff's terror of the situation. This is when you look at the world and you go, holy shit, everybody's asleep, including me, and I don't want to live like that.
So I want to touch on a question
Yes.
from Levita, who, I mean, I don't know if you were asking this with sarcasm, Levita, but she asked, where do we find these living, perfected folks?
It's only partially sarcastic
Yeah, I
because
can
Yeah.
understand.
on the one hand it's like I've been looking, I haven't been able to find them, so I'm kind of like I'm sitting here like writing this down.
Yeah. So there are no living perfected folks in the sense that we're talking about.
Yeah.
There are people who are good, who try and do good, and who are willing to admit their human frailties. That's a big one. If you find them, it's worth hanging out with them, especially if they know something. So like Noor, take her for an example. She is an entirely good person. I know you think I'm prejudiced about this, but it's actually true. She is a good person. She takes spiders outside on pieces of paper and releases them. She is kind to everybody. And she knows stuff. That's somebody worth hanging out with.
Aw.
I know stuff, but I'm kind of mean and surly. So.
I don't know. There are things I admire in that sense of really having strong boundaries. So there's something there's so much to learn from you as well. And I don't mean to spin this, but I think there are many ways of being good and many people we can learn from who have different qualities that are so that are good to learn from, to be around, to drink in and try out, to see how they fit in our own model of what a holistically good person is or looks like or could be.
Yeah,
So,
I heard somebody once say that, and different people say different things, but it's like side X says side Y is kind but not nice, and side X is nice but not kind. And I'm finding nice is not so good, but kind is, even though kind can sometimes look mean and surly. So,
yeah,
respect that.
agreed. Exactly. Yeah.
And,
So,
you know, Jesus gave us a clue to working this out. He said, by their fruits, you will know them. You know, and that's the bottom line. It's, do they walk their talk? Are they assholes? And the answer is, yeah, probably. But when they're assholes, do they make amends for that?
or if they were like Hitter, who seems to be doing asshole things, you know, he has a deeper. I mean, I don't really believe that the ends justify the means, but sometimes we don't have the full picture when we see something happening. And there is often, when you have a good person doing something that seems assholey, like there's a reason why they're doing that thing.
Yeah, I've seen that. I've experienced it and I've seen that. Yeah.
So I'm
And
glad
sometimes
that
when you know the
you
whole
yeah.
story. Yeah.
So it's important to use discernment to contextualize and deconstruct that in order to understand that there is nuance here. There is a sense that you need to be aware of what's actually going on. And it can be hard to tell that when you're just starting out. But this is a process of learning how to discern in that way. So
Yeah.
that's a great question. Thank you, Lavita, because it led us into a discussion about things that are related to our topic this evening. So, Mushtaq, you were talking about Fana-i Aham and how that is the terror of the situation,
Yeah.
which we discussed last week. Yeah.
Yeah, and what this talks about is the idea, and Gurdjieff did this with all of his students, or he tried to get them to the realization of, oh my God, I am asleep, I have no free will, my behavior is entirely stimulus response, and I have no control of my life. And to come to that understanding, it's an oh my God moment. It is holy shit, what the hell am I doing here? I don't remember wanting to come to this planet. But that is the first step, and that is something that is pretty much one-to-one between the masters and Gurdjieff. So is the second step. The second step is called Fana-i Afal. This is like the first step, only inward. When you realize that your entire inner world is smoke and mirrors, it has no existence. All of your cherished memories are illusions. All of your traumas are just thoughts that you hold on to and won't let go of. That all of these things that you think make you you are not you. And it's way harder than the first one. Because this one asks us to give up, first to see our personality as robotic as the world, as being as robotic as the world. And to acknowledge that within ourselves in order to get us to the place where we can do something about it. So, first the outer world, no good. Then the inner world, just as much fantasy. That one's hard. Most people don't like to go there. And that's also something that Gurdjieff really drove home to his students, is that the other world is just a way to convince you to be a good person according to somebody else's rule. One of my favorite Sufi poets, a dude by the name of Kabir, actually wrote a poem about just this. This is a poem about Fana fi Afal. It goes like this. Friend, hope for the guest while you are alive. Jump into experience while you are alive. Think and think while you are alive. What you call salvation belongs to the time before death. If you don't break your ropes while you're alive, do you think ghosts will do it for you after? The idea that the soul will join with the ecstatic because the body is rotten, that's all fantasy. What is found now is found then. And if you find nothing now, you will simply end up with an apartment in the city of death. If you make love with the divine now, in the next life you will have the face of satisfied desire. So plunge into the truth. Find out who the teacher is. Believe in the great sound. Kabir says this, when the guest is being searched for, it is the intensity of the longing for the guest that does all the work. Look at me, and you will see a slave to that intensity. So that is a poem that was an attempt to describe the experience of passing through fana I afal. It's like Rabia said, "Oh my Lord, if I love you for the desire for heaven, don't give me heaven. Oh Lord, if I fear you for if I move towards you from fear of hell, give me hell. I want to love you for yourself." She was a smart woman.
She was. Yeah, I plan on doing a video about her in the near future.
I think that that would be incredibly cool.
Yeah. So in the meantime, though, Alka has unmuted and probably has something she wants to share.
Go for it.
No, I just, since you were talking about Kabir and when she was asking about where can I find good people, I remembered this Kabir's poetry. I will first speak in Hindi, only then I can convert it into English.
Sure.
Go for it.
It says, "Bura jo dekhan main chala, bura na milya koi. Jo man khoja apna, tujhsa bura na koi." Which basically means I set out to find a flawed man and couldn't find any. When I finally peered inside myself, though, there was no man more flawed than me.
Yeah,
I like Kabir.
I like Kabir too. He's one of my favorites. And Kabir is an example of somebody who is in the tradition. He didn't care if the truth came from Islam, Hinduism, Sikhism, any kind of ism. He just looked for the truth, and he found it where he found it. Consequently, everybody claims him. Hindus say Kabir was Hindu. Muslims say Kabir was a Sufi. And the Sikhs write his poetry in their books. So I'd love to grow up to be like him.
And yeah, and Alka, that was lovely. Thank you for saying
Yeah,
that.
and a perfect thing. So, getting through that is rough. And this is where Gurdjieff used to say, man is asleep. He has no eye. He can know nothing until he wakes up. Which is almost a quote from a hadith of the Prophet, which is, man is asleep and he will not awaken until he dies. So you have that. And the Khwajagan created a practice specifically for this, which is, it's hard to find anybody who actually knows the practice anymore. In Arabic, it is tadhakur alazat al-haliya, yes, which means remembrance of the present moment. It's a kind of zikr. Tadhakur means to remember. So this literally means to remember the present moment. It was created by one of the early masters by the name of Azizan Ramitani. And it is not taught hardly anywhere anymore. Of all of the Naqshbandi groups I've ever encountered, only one of them practiced it. Some of the Yesevis practice it. If you want to learn this practice, it can only be learned mouth to ear. Come to our retreat, because the retreat is going to be around this practice. Boy, was that sneaky or what? Sneak that plug right in there.
You sure did.
All right, so Fana fi Sifat is the third Fana of the Masters. And this is important. The first two are via negativa. They are moving away from what is not wanted. This is moving towards what you want.
So not
This-
this, not this, but
Yeah. Yeah, the Fana Sifat is the way into the real world. It is the true inner world, the inner world of the awakened, higher emotional and intellectual centers. Any spiritual path that's real will lead to this step. And if it doesn't, it's not real. And this is, when you get here, you can't convey it in words. There is a concept, dhawaq in Arabic. And this is a heavy-duty Sufi concept that also Gurdjieff carried. It means, literally, it means taste. And what it's saying is, you can describe something to somebody, you can describe the taste of something, say chocolate or strawberries, blueberries, anything, to a person who's never tasted it. And when you're done, they will know no more than when you started. The only way for them to know what a blueberry tastes like is to put it in their mouth and taste. And Fana'i Sifat is putting that blueberry in your mouth. It's literally moving yourself into the awake state over and over again, and until you learn to live there.
so I guess we could describe this as oh, wow, just flit it away. Learning to, practicing, tasting the awake state, getting glimpses
Yes.
of it.
Yeah, and realizing that it will always be beyond the level of verbal abstraction.
But you
Yeah.
understand that better once you've had that taste for
Yeah.
yourself.
So, for a good teacher, part of a good teacher's job is to trick their students into eating the darn blueberry. It's like, here, put it in your mouth. Oh, no, it's a weird color. No, it's okay, put it in your mouth. It smells funny. Put it in your mouth. I can't do that. Put it in your mouth. No! Okay, don't put it in your mouth. I want to put it in my mouth.
Oh my gosh. But yeah, I mean, a lot of times people are afraid to surrender to the experience of awakeness, you know? They think it's a lot weirder and scarier than it actually is.
Oh, it's actually that's scary.
Okay, well, perhaps we can say we acclimate to it. You know, when we're getting those tastes of it. As you say, it's possible to learn to live in that state, to not just taste it, but make it what is most real to you, because it is what is most real to you. You're peeling away the veils that hide that fact from you. To use another big Sufi term, the veils.
And so this gets us to the last fana, which is called fana idat, or izat, the liberation of the essence. This is the overcoming of separation. This is the Arabi's oneness of being. This is the experience of you and the divine as being a unity, not separate, not two. It is a true Advaita. And when you experience this, it doesn't make you go away. It might give you a good house cleaning. But whatever is real can't be gone. So our understanding of this is different than some of the more standard understandings where they talk about the annihilation of the individual I and all of that.
The moth just dive bombing into the flame and disappearing in
Yeah.
a puff of smoke.
Yeah, but those people don't realize that there's a stage after fana, which is called baqa, which means subsisting, where one is held up by the divine presence. My teacher years ago explained this to me as he said, look, you're going to reach this stage where your I is going to be dissolved back into God. But this will only last for a second, because if it lasts any longer than that, your body will die. So what God does is he gives you back your essence, but instead of the old attributes that you had, he just gives you all his attributes, because that's all he's got. And there you are. You're you, but brand new. New paint job, everything. And this again goes back to a lot of the ideas of what Gurdjieff talked about. And it makes his teachings very close to those of the Khwajagan, as opposed to the larger body of Sufis in the world. Yeah, another word for fana-izat is huyat. Hu, he, the ultimate sound. It means the state where only one is present. And when you touch this, that's what you get. The state where only one is present. Not two. True Advaita. But it has nothing to do with reality and illusion, which is a duality. It's just the one. And you look around and you go, oh, this is everything. Look over there, it's the one. Look over here, it's the one. There is no here. Here is one. There is one. It's all one. You can't even talk about it. It is an experience that cannot be described. It can be hinted at by poets who have touched this state, which is why everybody loves Rumi's poetry, or Kabir's, or Yunus Emre's, or
Conference of the Birds by Attar.
yeah, all of that stuff. Attar, by the way, was within this particular lineage that we're talking about. He was a descendant of the Khwajagan through the Naqshbandi line. So,
Jonathan.
what does... Yeah, Jonathan, ask us questions.
Yeah. Wouldn't you say that it's not possible to become awake to the horror of the reality of the world? That one is only able to become awake to the level that one is ready to receive or able to handle. I mean, that's my personal experience. I've never been shocked and horrified by things I've become aware to or awake to.
Oh, we'll fix that as soon as I can get some more mushrooms, man.
Well, it's like, I'm sure everyone's had the experience of having a bad dream where a loved one dies, or I've been shot in the head, or it doesn't feel that bad in the dream. There's a slight numbness, and not because being in dreaming, you're not fully awake. So in the same way, difficult for me to become awake to the real horror of the reality out there, because I'm not able to become, I don't have the capacity to become fully awake to the horror of what's out there. I mean, and the mushrooms comments, I mean, that's pretty extreme to have to take something that strong.
Maybe. I mean, if you need to experience it, that's one way to do it. Trust me, I had a lot of people when I was working emergency rooms coming in with just that experience back in the 60s and early 70s.
Everyone panic, meltdown.
Yeah, like, oh my God,
Revelations of, oh,
I just saw
shit.
reality, and reality is pretty scary.
But did it help anyone? If
Who knows?
they had a bad experience to that degree, did it help them, or did it actually turn them off the whole idea of awakening?
Who can say? I never followed them for the rest of their lives, so I don't know. We can pretend that it was the shock that they needed to wake themselves up from the trance of their lives. Or we can pretend that they spent the rest of their life in an insane asylum. And none of that matters. What matters is you. There are milder ways to get to the point of being horrified by whatever is going on. And ask me privately, and I'll give you a couple of suggestions, but that's not something that I'm going to put out into the world for any fool to mess around with. None of them involve mushrooms, so you don't have to worry.
Thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, I guess you'll have to follow up with much talk about that. Does anybody else have questions or thoughts or anything coming up that they might like to share? I can call on people too. Ailey, how about you? What's coming up for you? Oh, Zainab's unmuted too.
You are very
come
sharp
after.
in sensing that I want to print something. I wonder, the sheikhs or the prophets where Mustaf is talking about, let's say the one that say that the ultrasounds are not okay for pregnant. I think, well, how I see it, then they didn't reach the level of human adulthood. And how come that so? Why didn't they get that level?
The level of what?
Human adulthood.
Human adulthood.
That's a good question. And the answer is, I don't know. And you're right in your observation that they probably didn't, because, I mean, I look at, if I'm an adult human being, and I look at ultrasound, I go, I don't know what it is. Before I say anything about it, I should learn something about it. Maybe I should talk with a doctor or two. I have students who are doctors. The problem with this is that I know doctors who won't give a baby an ultrasound because this guy told them that it was bad. So you're right. It has that they have missed human adulthood somewhere, and you can only blame their teacher for going, "Oh, this guy's ready to go out and teach."
The teacher's teacher.
The teacher's
Yeah.
teacher, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There was a
So,
failure somewhere.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So they miss also the point about what you're talking about, all those fanas.
Yeah.
They stopped to stay awake.
Yeah, it's an interesting problem.
I mean, the way I think about it is when you have these. I'm not saying every institution, every Sufi order that has garb that they wear when they meet and stuff. I don't think it's fair to generalize and say that they're all just caught in the trappings and it's all superficial with no real substance to it. However, when you have an organization that is so reliant on the trappings and the ceremony and the symbols, I feel like they can almost take the place of doing the actual work. So you can check all the boxes as a teacher, like, okay, I completed this, I completed this, I created this garb with my own hands, and suddenly you've checked all the boxes for being a teacher, but you've got none of the substance behind it.
Yeah, and there's a difference between wearing liturgical clothing to a ceremony and wearing it all the time.
Yeah. I mean,
So,
it's
my teacher, when he led Zikr, he would have his funny hat and he would have his cloak. And he often had a very cool vest. I admired his vest. But, you know, and he would do that. And a lot of people would come dressed in their finery. Just like somebody goes to church, they wear a suit.
yeah.
And then
Friday
my teacher,
prayer,
the
yeah.
next day, would look like everybody else. He would have slacks. He would have a regular button-down shirt. He was just looked like any other person that you'd meet on the street. You could not tell that he was special. So you have that. But you also have these guys who always dress in this manner. And I'm not talking about in the Middle East. I'm talking about here in the States. And it's interesting because you say, why are you dressing like that? And they say, it's sunnah. And I look at them and I'm going, wait a minute. The prophet was a 5th century Arab. And you're dressed like a 19th century Turk. You have a disconnect there. That is not what the prophet dressed like. So if you think that you are going to emulate the prophet's dress, you're going to have to change a bit.
Yeah.
But, you know, logic doesn't enter into this.
Right. So, I mean, I think my main point is just that I think sometimes the trappings can take place of the actual deepening of understanding. You know, it becomes something they take for granted, assume that they've accomplished, they move forward up the quote unquote ranks, and suddenly they're the teacher, and everyone assumes that they have certain knowledge, and they actually don't. But everyone is fooled otherwise. So I think that probably is what's happening in circumstances like that. So thanks, Ailey, for that. I did see Zainab unmuted. I want to make sure that she gets a chance to speak.
Okay.
I have a question. Did teachings of G had the 4 levels of the canon?
Implied, not explicitly. He didn't talk about it as levels of annihilation. I think it would have scared the Russians if he had done that. But there are one-to-one corollaries between things that he talked about and these 4 levels of annihilation.
So his craft was based on this, you would say?
I think so. That's my opinion. Not entirely based on this, because he did pull from Tibetan Buddhism, he did pull from Eastern Orthodox Christianity, he did pull from Hinduism to a certain extent.
And
But
and he did have his own thinking, his own
yeah,
process too.
yeah. And that being said, the core of his actual doing, I am convinced, comes out of this line of transmission from the Khwajagan, that he learned it hanging out with the dervishes in Bukhara. And when he went to visit the Sarmoun, he went not into the mountains of Afghanistan, as lots of people would like us to believe, but I think instead across the Amu Darya River into deep into Central Asia, somewhere in there. My theory, have no proof, wasn't there.
Zainab. So, Levita, in response to, blending into your community and just dressing like anybody else does and just being an average person, she said, that reminds me of Jesus. His enemies had to find someone to betray him because he looked like everybody else in his group. He didn't, yeah, I understand that, as he wasn't doing anything to make himself ostentatiously apparent, in terms of his dress, mannerisms, all that stuff. I mean, same thing with Mohammed, really. It was his behavior and his words that made him stand out.
Yep, he looked just like everybody else. Probably better looking than a lot of them, but...
That's what they say, yeah. Yeah, anybody else? I would love to hear from Cherie if she has anything she might like to share.
I don't. I don't know.
That's fair, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's been very interesting.
Awesome. I'm glad to hear that then. Bibi, how are you doing?
Yeah. Good to see you again, by the way, Bibi.
Yeah, it's nice to have you alive. Hey.
Hey everyone. Yeah, sounds good. Just some more things to ponder upon.
Yeah. I mean, it's a lot of stuff, a lot of concepts that maybe not everyone is immediately familiar with too. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Bibi.
So we should probably think about finishing this up so that the Gurdjieffians can rage at us in the comments.
And so people can complain about how long our spiel is.
Oh, we shorten the spiel way
Yeah,
down.
we'll make progress. We're gonna exercise our brain muscles and try to narrow it down, make it simple but straightforward. Yeah. All right, so I guess we can go on Brady Bunch mode.
Yes, ma'am.
And we can all wave to each other and everybody who's watching
folks.
on the replay. And we will see you again next time. Thanks for joining us. Bye.
Bye.